Hey there, my name is Shane Craddock, and this is the Inner Edge podcast, where I share a different take on how to lead and live a sustainable high performance life. Over the course of different episodes, I'm going to challenge the belief that tension, stress, and struggle are essential to success and creativity. My experience is that there's an easier way, there's a better way, and indeed there's an essential way that we need to explore for the times that we live in. So let's go ahead, let's jump in and explore. Most leaders, I think, in my experience, and I would have included myself in this for a long time, believe that clarity is something that you have to do, that you have to prepare for it, that you have to kind of manage yourself somehow into it, and that you have to unwittingly apply effort to get there. And I was speaking to actually somebody yesterday who was talking about get into the present moment. And as they were talking about it, they were literally getting tense in front of me talking about it. And we had this conversation about, I suppose, my understanding now of what does that mean, being in the moment, being here, being now, being in the now. And what I realized over time is that the effort I was putting into being in the moment was actually knocking me more out of the moment. I don't know if you can relate to that, but clarity is the same. I mean, with the present moment, it's really more about understanding that you actually are always in the present moment. There's nothing really to do, and this is the paradox. It's more about letting go, particularly of the thinking that you're doing. And clarity is directly linked. Because in a way, the more you relax your mind, something happens that actually loosens you out. So when something matters to most people, they generally tighten their grip internally. So I need to get sales, or I need to fix this problem. And without thinking about it, we can get tense. We can tighten our grip. So we think more about it, we watch ourselves more, we monitor more, and we try harder. And this can be, I think, confusing and tricky. But here's the problem with what I just said, is that I'm going to say that if you reflect a little bit on the moments that you've led the best, like really the best, or that you've been at your best, I'm going to probably say that if you reflect on those moments, you're going to see that they didn't come from a huge amount of internal effort or strain. They usually happened when you stopped interfering mentally. And this particular episode is about that moment of a clear mind, an effortless mind. Because in a weird way, a genuinely clear mind isn't achieved by a technique. It's really a state that comes about when you stop interfering with something that's naturally there. Now, let me address maybe a possible objection straight away. For example, somebody says, well, if I don't manage myself a certain way, Shane, then I'm going to lose my clarity, like my standards will slip. And that sounds logical, but to me, I think it's incorrect. That your own standards aren't, if you look at it really, they're not upheld by internal tension. They're generally upheld by some form of inner clarity or very clear understanding. And what actually breaks performance down isn't really a lack of effort. It's effort that kind of turns in on yourself. It kind of gets like it's skewed effort. And when people try to produce or force clarity, which I did for many, many years, and I see a lot of people do it without realizing that they're doing it. But when they try to force clarity, what generally happens is their listening narrows, their judgment degrades and tightens, and their overall effectiveness actually reduces. Now, it feels responsible sometimes to say to try and force clarity, but it really is counterproductive. And clarity doesn't respond to unhealthy pressure. It really responds to internal space. And if I'd heard myself talking about this 10 years ago, maybe more, I'd like to think that it would maybe stop and think, hang on, what am I actually doing here to try and create clarity? Because a lot of the time what we're doing is unconscious, down to unconscious beliefs or unconscious behavior that we've just inherited over time and applied over time. And again, I'll often have this discussion where people will say, well, I think a bit of pressure is healthy. Um, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with that. But what I'm more curious about is, you can put 10 people in a situation that apparently is pressurized and they will all react in a different way. Why? Because their inner world will generally be different and they will react in a different way. So the inside of a person, of those 10 people, some might have a healthy reaction and some might have an unhealthy reaction. It's not the pressure that's causing that. It's the way that they react and think about the pressure. And so what I'm going to say, in general, in my experience, strangely, the more that you try to help yourself get clarity or to perform at a higher level, the more noise and interference you bring into your own system. Now, you've likely already seen this in your own life with a little bit of reflection. So you could think of maybe a meeting or a pitch or presentation where you were overly prepared, perhaps, but weirdly ineffective when it took place. Maybe you had the answers ready. Maybe you were trying to guide things a certain way. Maybe you're trying to land a specific point. But somehow, for whatever reason, the meeting just didn't click. It felt heavy. Now, contrast that with a different moment, maybe where there was the same stakes. Maybe you had the same competence in a certain situation. But importantly, you weren't trying to manage the outcome. So because of that, you were more relaxed and you were probably listening better. My guess is you were probably responding more effectively to the moment as it unfolded. So you were more present, more here. And you were kind of letting the conversation unfold. So there's a little bit more of the word, let's call it flow, very important word. So words probably came more easily to you. You weren't overthinking things or second guessing. Your timing improved. You knew when to lean in, you knew when to lean out, and decisions probably landed clearer and cleaner. But here's the key point. In that situation, you didn't suddenly become smarter. In that situation, what I'm going to say is you just stopped interfering in your inner world with your mind. Now, another objection that might come in here is a location chain. That's fine, to have that kind of clarity in easy moments. But what about like real pressure situations? But again, like I said about the 10 people earlier on, they each handle pressure differently. And pressure isn't what removes or breaks clarity. What removes clarity, I think, is treating pressured thinking as if it's real, as if it is in charge. So when that kind of thinking comes in, if of the 10 people, 5 were getting pressurized and 5 weren't, what you'll see is in the 5 that weren't is that they were having the same thoughts, but they had a different relationship with those thoughts, as in they weren't taking them as serious and they were probably letting them pass by. So they might still have an anxious thought or a pressured thought, but they wouldn't really engage or give it attention. Whereas the 5 that were getting knocked out of their clarity and getting stressed were getting hypnotized by those same thoughts. And so each of the 5 will get different results. So what about you? Where, for example, do you apply internal effort, believing that it improves your performance when it actually reduces it? And I wonder, are you open to just exploring that a little bit? Number 2, when you're trying to help or fix in a conversation or decision, what actually happens to your listening and to your timing? A lot of people have this continuous mantra at the back of their head without realizing it. It's just, okay, how do I fix this? How do I help this? How do I fix this? What's the next step? Not realizing that that's actually blocking your clarity of just being able to listen. It's a very subtle but incredibly powerful thing in my experience. And a final question to give you would be, what would change if you trusted your clarity to emerge naturally instead of trying to force it or manufacture it? Now, to me, these aren't highfalutin philosophical questions. They're very operational, grounded questions, and I really hope you give them some attention. So, to close it out, And so before I do that, I should say, if you're interested in kind of different formats, I'm increasingly spending a lot of time writing on Substack. Obviously, you may or may not know that I do a weekly email, which you can check out at shanecraddock.com. But you can also find me on Substack now, where I'm doing some really, I suppose, sharing some things that I wouldn't share anywhere else because of the format. I'm starting to enjoy Substack myself. So check it out. I'll leave the link in the show notes underneath this. So to close out on this particular episode, what I'm saying is any work that you put into getting clarity of mind, it's not anti-effort, it's anti-misplaced effort. So it doesn't remove discipline, it doesn't remove preparation or accountability. What, in my experience, it removes is the internal friction that quietly degrades all of those: discipline, preparation, accountability. And again, what I'm saying is, if you really reflect on when you've ever led well or performed well, what you'll see is that you don't really lead well or perform well because you're tense. You lead and perform well because you're available, internally available. There's space inside. There's a natural clarity. So maybe today or this week, if you feel yourself tightening, or maybe trying to manage your state, or trying to get it right, whatever right is, but trying to get it right, maybe take a pause, take a breath, and just remember what I'm saying here is that what I'm saying as an experiment is you don't need a technique to get clarity. You don't need to do more. If anything, all that needs to be done is stop listening to your interfering thoughts. Stop taking them so seriously. Because clarity, your own clarity, it's already there. It's just waiting to come in and waiting for the clouds of thought to disappear. And the last point I'll make is your best work, if you reflect on it, I think what you see, something that's true, is your best work has never come from effort alone. Like when I'm going to say effort now, I mean tense effort, exhausting effort, fatiguing effort. Really, your best work comes from effort without internal obstruction. And that's kind of when you move into action that is flow oriented, flow at its center. And that's not philosophy to me. That's really about hard-nosed performance. That's it for this week. Ciao for now.